This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
I wanted to start today off with just a little bit of follow-up because we've had, just over the last few episodes, probably 10 or so episodes, a few little pieces of information that we've gotten wrong, and I want to talk about a fraction of those today.
Yeah, we got some of the corrections we've been asking for and clarifications, which is really cool. It means that people are actually listening.
Right. Yeah, no, I've definitely gotten a few people on Reddit who've been just letting me know when we mess things up, and I do appreciate that. Rush Parable had a correction on the character ages. I've always been thinking of our main characters as around 18, but they really are closer to 20.
Yeah, me too. So I think we've consistently said the wrong number.
Yeah, we've been consistently saying like, the three boys are 18. They're not. They're 20. Nynaeve is 25. I think we've gotten that one right. Egwene is closer to 17, 18. I thought she was more like 16.
Me too.
Lan's 45, and Moraine is 42. We were close on some of those, off on some of them.
Yeah.
Age is just a number.
Thanks for the correction.
Rush Parable brought up another point when we were talking about who killed Laemon. He thought it might be Rand's birth father, because the evidence really does seem to be there that he was killed by Aiel, not by Tam. No matter how much I want that to be true, it's not. But he was killed by Aiel, and then so there's some speculation. Is it one of the Aiel we know? Could it be Rand's birth father, Jonwyn? I'd
kind of like to think that too.
Yeah, I don't think there's any evidence for it. One of Rand's fathers killed Laemon. One or the other. That's his birth father or his adoptive father. That's what I'm going to say. So yeah, thanks for the feedback, Rush Perishable. I appreciate that. The other person who's given us a bunch of feedback is JFF Dugan. He caught my mistake when I was talking about Salia when Tom was giving his stories. I said that was Sally Yates. Sally Yates is the assistant attorney general who was fired by the Trump administration and then sort of testified against them.
Whoops. Also an important character in a fictional universe.
The fictional universe of Trump's head. Salia, the way Tom was talking about it, is Sally Ride. She was the first American woman in space.
Okay.
And I said she was on the Challenger. No. I was wrong about that.
I'm sure I just agreed because I didn't know.
I'm pretty good with the fictional universe. When we get to the real one, I definitely don't know what I'm talking about.
More informed on this world.
JFF Dugan had another point when we were talking about how Moraine was related to Laemon. He, I guess, looked that up. She is his niece. Her father was Laemon's brother.
So, yeah, closer than I was thinking.
Yeah.
To the throne. I don't know what happens to the Kyrianan line. I'm sure we could find out if we looked after the Aiel War. The same families are in charge, right?
Yeah. There's enough relatives, I think, that even though he's killed,
a bunch of them
take over. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah,
we could look it up.
We're not gonna.
No, you look it up. And then I just wanted to say one last thing before we really got into this chapter, which is I really appreciate the feedback. If you have a chance, if you could rate us on iTunes or in the podcast app, I'd really appreciate that.
Yes, please.
Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, I'm looking for some art. We right now I think we're just using the map.
Yeah. And you started putting like the chapter heading symbol?
Yeah. For each podcast, I do the chapter heading. But I feel like we need a logo. You and me sitting at the table. We talked a little bit about the fox and the raven and a few other little clever...
Oh, yeah. I talked to a couple of friends of mine, but I have to try to draw something a little better than like the stick figure image we came up with last week. I think that'd be pretty good. Oh man, maybe we should like post it up online and see if people want to do that for fun.
Yeah, because we are not artistic in any way, shape, or form, and so we'd really love to have just a little piece of art that doesn't look like it was made by a 5-year-old.
Yeah, so that's about our artistic skill level.
That's your artistic skill level. I'm at about like a 2-year-old.
Working on holding a pencil.
Let's get down to brass tacks and talk about this actual chapter.
Cool.
Chapter 9, Tellings of the Wheel.
And the image underneath for this one is the Dragon Fang.
Second time we've seen the Dragon Fang, right?
Yeah.
So, Rand has fallen asleep sitting next to Tam.
The recently healed Tam. And as he falls asleep in their room in the Wine Spring Inn, he is pulled by Ishmael into a dream shard, is my running theory.
Yeah, so I think we both came up with this independently. We were sitting down and taking our notes, and we both said, hey, this is a dream shard, because this isn't a common dream. And I was trying to think what kind of... It's not a prophecy dream.
Yeah, and it's not straight up dream world. It's not Teleran Riyadh, and we can see that... At first, I thought it might be a dream shard because of the unlikely looking place that Rand is in at first, where there's nothing living and the sun is red, but it's freezing cold. But it's possible that he's at Shale Ghul somewhere.
That's what I said, is he's at Shale Ghul. Just in that valley covered in mist is the Valley of Thakandar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At first, I thought he was walking up to Dragon Mount.
That's the second scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I realized I was wrong. But we see later in the dream that there's a bunch of people in Tarvalin when Rand is in the city, which wouldn't happen in Teleran Riyadh. And if they were there, they wouldn't be aware of Rand. They wouldn't talk to him. There wouldn't be such a big gathering of people standing around unless they were all Dreamwalkers, which is ridiculous.
No, I think he's clearly not in just straight Teleon Riyadh. Then it's just his dream where he's dreaming these people into place. There wouldn't be other people. But I don't think it's just his dream, because there's things in there that he doesn't know at this point. He's never seen Tarvalin.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
Lewis Theron Telamon has never seen Tarvalin. There's no way he would know what it looks like unless this was in a dream shard created by someone who had seen it.
Yeah.
It's not just his own dream, because he gets information in this dream that he could not otherwise know.
Yeah.
So it has to be some sort of manifestation created either by...
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just looking at my notes, there's Trollocs in it, too.
Right.
They're chasing him at one point. And I don't think we ever see Trollocs in Teleran Riyadh. Unless somebody makes them.
We see them in nightmares. They don't dream themselves into Teleran Riyadh. So what's a dream shard?
A dream shard is where a talented dreamwalker... Well, I think what Ishmael has done here is, and we see this later in the books with other characters, and if he knows approximately where Rand is and whether or not he's sleeping, he can... The place where you go to where you see all the stars that are people.
That's sort of the place in between Teleon Riyadh, and it's like after they fall asleep. And then there's just...
I don't know that there's a name for it.
There's not really a name. It's just sort of the place in between with the dreams.
Well, essentially, Ishmael goes into Teleran Riyadh, then looks for Rand and pulls his mind into a place that he's created inside the world of dreams. Almost a separate place.
Yeah, a separate, like a bubble.
That obeys Ishmael, because it's Ishmael's dream, and he's pulling Rand into it.
And only talented dreamwalkers can create these dream shards.
Yeah.
And Ishmael is a talented dreamwalker. We know that.
And super experienced.
I honestly think he spends most of his time in the dream. Most of the other Forsaken sort of have a home base. I don't think Ishmael does. I honestly think he lives in
Teleran Riyadh.
In dream shards of Teleon Riyadh.
Well, there's a lot of interesting things you can do in the world of dreams that you can't do. So even as someone who's not a talented channeler, if you're a talented dreamwalker, you can like kill people from the other side of the world.
And he pulls people in and tortures them and keeps them alive for a long time. And I mean, he does awful things to them. But yeah, he's able to pull Rand into his dream shard. It appears that he's able to do that because he's found him, right? Like whether through the Raven, whether it's through Fane.
Yeah.
But he doesn't appear at this point to know which of the three boys is the Dragon Reborn, because they all often have the same dream. Not in this case. This is a weird dream. I don't really have...
It was really strange, and I'm not sure what Ishmael is trying to do here, but it definitely looks like a dream shard.
Yeah.
And Ishmael appears in it, or someone that looks like him.
He never describes the face with the flames in the eyes and the mouth in this dream, but he turns away from the face. He says the face is painful.
And he's filled with fear the whole time, which is also something a dreamwalker can do to a non-experienced dreamwalker.
You know, he says a few times things like he'd never seen it before, but he knew it. The memory flashed away like Quicksilver when he tried to touch it, but the memory was there. Just a few things in this dream where he seems to recognize the voice, recognize the place. And I'm just, even though he's never seen it before, and I was just wondering if you had an idea of like where that knowledge is coming from.
I mean, Luz Theron has seen Shale Ghul before.
Yeah, but he hasn't seen Tarvalon.
No.
And he has heard Ishmael's voice before. So maybe it is coming through Luz Theron, but I have a hard time believing at this point that a lot of his memories are coming forward.
Yeah, that doesn't really make any sense.
So this is just one of those scenes that I haven't given it a lot of deep thought. It's so early, and it's such a random dream that really, up until this point, I just always thought of it as sort of like this weird dream of the future. But I don't know. Going into it and looking at it now, I have a hard time really figuring out exactly what's going on.
I kind of just assumed Ishmael is just trying to terrorize him.
Maybe he's looking for him. This is literally first contact, right? I think that somehow Rand got sucked into the dream, maybe even accidentally.
Maybe. Ishmael could just be looking.
Yeah.
I also noticed this funny thing happens where Rand is running towards Tarvalon and he's like being pulled backwards, like what happens in nightmares. You run and you only go backwards or something.
Right.
And then he like trips and falls or something and just lands in Tarvalon. And the whole time he's focused on getting to the city. And that made me wonder if he manipulated the world of dreams a little with his the rule of need, or a rule in Teleran Riyadh where if you can find something that you really need, or go to a place that you really need to go, even if you don't know where it is.
Right.
The dream can take you there.
I'm not sure it's need so much as just like in the world of dreams, you imagine yourself somewhere and you just appear there.
Yeah. Well, at that point, it kind of almost looked like Ishmael is not quite in control.
There's a section right before that where he's really getting beat down. He's sort of falling into the dream shard and he's about to give in, but then he gets this core of anger and stubbornness, and that really seems to allow him to resist the dream. And I think that's maybe why Ishmael may not be in full control, is because Rand's actually found that two-river stubbornness and used that sort of as his core that's held him in place.
Yeah.
In the world of dreams.
And we see that that kind of line of things happen where Moraine uses the small amount of the little push of Moraine uses that little bit of compulsion on him, and it doesn't seem to work completely. So she's also trying to manipulate it with him a little, and it's backfiring slightly, or not partially.
Yeah, he seems to be pretty resistant to any sort of compulsion, whether that's just two-river stubbornness or his connection to the power. I'm not really sure, but
maybe both.
I think Moraine and Ishmael are both trying to manipulate him here, and he's resisting pretty well.
Yeah, and the Ta'veren nature too.
So he says a couple of times he hears a familiar voice, and he thinks it's Shaitan. He thinks it's the Dark One. I think it's Ishmael.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's perhaps a bit of Luz Theron coming through, who obviously would know the voice of Ishmael because they know each other very well.
Yeah, and this mountain where he has a glimmer of recognition, but knows that he hasn't seen it before at the same time.
At this point, he hasn't really channeled, so he hasn't really been corrupted, so I don't really see how the memories are carrying forward.
Me neither.
So maybe it doesn't have to mean anything. Maybe.
Everything means something.
So yeah, there's this section with all the people, pointing him towards the White Tower. And it sort of reminds me of the prophecy where they talk about you people weep for your salvation.
Yeah.
Right? he is the sacrifice, and the people need him to be the sacrifice, and that's his destiny. And what this dream is saying is the people are going to be upset if you resist. You need to be a willing sacrifice.
Yeah.
And he guides himself towards the center, towards the end. And at the end, what's waiting for him?
He opens the doors to the White Tower, and there's a Myrddraal waiting.
Yeah, Myrddraal just sitting there waiting, being like, we've been waiting for you. And it's like, okay. So in that case, I think the Myrddraal is representing the Dark One. And he has this journey where everyone wants him to be the sacrifice, and he walks to the end. What's waiting at the end? The Dark One.
Yeah. I mean, that is a big part of what made me think that this is just Ishmael trying to terrorize Rand and confuse him and just lead him in the wrong direction. That's my unfounded theory.
Yeah, and I think that my theory on the Dark One is trying to drive Rand to despair. I don't think the Dark One doesn't have the power to destroy the wheel, but he can. There's a chance for Rand to destroy it. He has the power to end the Wheel of Time at various points during this series. And I think what the Dark One is basically trying to do is get him to give in to despair. And a lot of the actions that don't make sense, the sort of let the Lord of Chaos rule, sometimes they're trying to kill Rand, sometimes they're trying to convert him, sometimes they're trying to go after his hometown. A lot of that sort of happens because the Dark One isn't trying to beat Rand. He's trying to
just terrorize
him.
I like that theory. Fits mine.
And so this is just sort of the first little bit of fear and terror that they're instilling into him.
Yeah.
So that wakes him up.
Rand wakes startled, looks over and sees Tan, who wakes up shortly after. And Rand kind of fills him in on this scene since Tan doesn't have any memory of what happened basically since right after the fight with Trollocs the night before.
It basically, once he got cut.
Yeah.
He doesn't remember much after the fever took hold. One thing I noticed is Rand wakes up with a sore spot in his side where the sword was sticking him.
Foreshadowing?
Very much foreshadowing.
You think so?
Yeah, look.
I didn't even think about it.
Here's the quote. He rubbed the sore spot on his side. Apparently he had slept with the sword hilt jabbing him in the ribs. And that's just
where he gets stabbed.
That's
later.
where he gets stabbed. That's where we constantly talk about the wound in his side. It's almost infuriating.
You got it.
Infuriating. How often they talk about the wound in his side. And this it has to be foreshadowing. He has to know he was going to bring that up. And
Sure.
have the sword jabbing him in the side when he wakes up after this terrible dream. It's like the first thing he says.
And that's such a big part of our legends. Well, the first two that come to mind is Odin and Jesus both get stabbed in the side.
And the Fisher King.
The Fisher King. We could think of more probably if we had the internet.
The wound in the side is definitely a trope of historical gods.
Yeah. So it makes sense that it shows up so many times in the book.
But I couldn't get past that. Just like earlier when he walked in with the dawn. I was like, he who comes with the dawn. Here he's got a wound in his side. There's so much foreshadowing in the early chapters that it has to be intentional.
I'm sure it is. He's setting up a lot here. And the way things repeat. Because I think the Aiel, he who comes with the dawn is Aiel prophecy.
Right.
And they start calling them that after he returns from Rudaean at dawn a couple days later or something. It could literally mean anything. It doesn't have to mean, or it could mean all of these things.
It's like there's a prophecy that sort of you think it describes Rand, where they're trying to get him to remember remember how to feel emotions again. But then Moraine goes out and says, "Oh, this actually describes the nations. The Heart of Stone actually describes the Kyrian in the Fortress of Stone." And I should just look it up.
You can pause really quick.
There can be no health in us, nor any good thing grow. For the land is one with the dragon reborn, and he is one with the land. Soul of fire, heart of stone, in pride he conquers. forcing the proud to yield. He calls upon the mountains to kneel, the seas to give way, and the very skies to bow. Pray that the heart of stone remembers tear, and the soul of fire love. And throughout the whole series, that prophecy we think is talking about Rand, right? He has the soul of fire, he has the heart of stone, in pride he conquers. Moraine sort of says...
It could be about the nations.
It could be about the nations.
Like the mountains.
The heart of stone is the fortress, the stone.
Or the Tyran. Because the stone of Tyr?
The stone of Tyr, right. He calls upon the mountains to kneel is, I think, the borderlanders. The seas to give way are the sea folk. The skies to bow are the Bearlane's nation. Man, yeah.
Took me forever to figure out that oilfish are whales.
You just
it's
let me know.
So
yeah.
obvious.
Where
I don't know why it took me so long.
When do they talk about oilfish?
Oh, like way later.
Okay.
Yeah. Just because we were talking about Mayan. It was like how they stay independent even though they're a tiny nation next to a powerful one. They make all this cash on oilfish, whatever that is.
Yeah. Hunting whales.
Yeah.
Hunting.
It's got to be.
Because they're in a weird position. They're right next to the waste. So they're on the ocean between Tyr and the... Tyr is such a weird nation. It's literally like a little half circle.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's not very good map drawing by Jordan.
I always just kind of assumed it meant that these nations' borders are weak.
Yeah. That it's just about a radius around the main city.
Yeah.
And that there's no exact border. It's just, it's about this far.
I mean, each is different, but a lot of them are more like city-states than nation-states.
Right. I mean, we also spend a lot of time in the cities.
Yeah, that's true.
So, no, it does seem to be that there's one city and then the farms that supply food for it. And they feel disconnected.
Yeah, we definitely see some true city-states.
And but there's some barren areas in between that used to be inhabited that are now, there's just not enough people.
Yeah, for various reasons.
Right.
We kind of got into that in the first couple of episodes where we talk about the history leading up to the books, where basically there are these huge events that wipe out tons and tons of people, or probably millions of people every 1,000 years or so, and then these awful wars in between.
And just the degradation of society. It's not really holding up that well.
Slowly falling over the last 3,000 years.
So, back to the chapter.
Rand relates the story to Tam.
Moraine just told him, "Did you have any weird dreams?" And he just dismisses it. He's like, "Oh, I didn't eat enough, so I had a bad dream." Like, come on, Rand. Like, put two and two together. Seriously? That annoyed me a little bit at this point, where I was just like, Rand, please.
Yeah.
Just don't dismiss it as I didn't eat enough.
I mean, you can say he doesn't know what's going on, and he really doesn't. But also, you know, if I were this confused and there was a expert in front of me on these, I would be more likely to take their opinion than my own.
I think he's just so concerned about his father, it doesn't even occur to him to follow up.
You know, though, when I was 20 years old, I probably wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just now getting to the point where I realize that it's more likely that anyone is right than I am. It's as likely, at least.
I just assume I'm wrong most of the time.
Me too.
Yeah.
You're more likely to be right. What happens next? Tam really easily accepts that Rand has to leave, which is a little surprising, but not totally, because Tam's always reasonable.
Yeah, I wrote that Tam sees the need right away. Rand's not running away. You know, this isn't something that he's just like, oh, I have to escape my family and I hate... Rand's not trying to run away. He loves his life.
Yeah. Here we sort of have the opposite, where he really doesn't want to leave. And we can see that he's afraid to, even.
But his father says, I understand. If they're after you, you have to flee.
Yeah.
He understands that as a town, they don't have the ability to protect him.
You'll be safer with an Aes Sedai than you will with a few chubby farmers.
Which turn out to be pretty badass later, but...
Yeah.
We don't know that at this point.
Tam's already a badass.
Well, definitely.
Then Lan bursts in. He's like, Shepherder, get up. There's trouble outside.
Which isn't really, it's a little bit exaggerated. It's just a bunch of villagers being assholes.
I mean, Lan may not know that. And I guess he's kind of like this constantly throughout the series, but in these couple of parts, he seems like particularly stressed.
He really doesn't, at this point, care much about these characters.
Yeah.
He's met these, like, country yokels, and he's saying, voice rasped with irritation. We have to hurry. Don't you understand the word trouble? He's like, you bunch of country yokels, like... Hurry. Like he's irritated at them, he doesn't like them, he's annoyed by them. Like, for as little emotion as we get out of Lan, to hear his voice rasp with irritation means he's pretty pissed off at these guys.
Yeah, he's annoyed. I think I was saying this while we were recording the chapter before this. It makes me wonder if it's because of how, I shouldn't say physically strained, but I guess magically strained Moraine is right now. We know Lan continuously complains about how tired Moraine is, and that's in his head all the time. So he has to think about how she feels. But possibly also he's influenced just by Moraine's feelings on this and how important she believes this is, how sure she is, and how much she wants things to go, or needs even things to go the way she wants them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is important to them.
Yeah.
It's what they've been doing for the last 20 years.
And later we even see, this really surprised me, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I think it's when Egwene shows up to join them in leaving. And Moraine's like, yeah, you can come, like, you're a part of this. And Lan is, like, visibly surprised, which is also something you don't see very much throughout the series. And then at some point, Lan starts to argue with her a little, which almost never happens in public. Like 2 or 3 times in the whole thousands of pages of this, do you see him? You see them when they're alone together. They'll argue a little. But he almost never does it in public. He doesn't backtalk her. Not in public, anyway.
I mean, he has his opinions, but he supports her to everybody else.
So the boys are led by Lan down the stairs and out the door, where we see Moraine kind of staring down a group of troublesome villagers.
This is another bit of a fantasy trope. I see this a lot. I'm thinking of when Kaladin's father is confronted by the villagers, and he has this is in the Stormlight Archive. Yeah. When he has the goblet full of diamonds and they want to take him from him, and he like steps out and like holds up the light and is like, I've healed you, and I've healed you, and I've healed you, which is almost exactly what happens in this
Oh my
scene.
gosh, I didn't notice that. But yeah.
It's an incredible mirror. I wonder if Sanderson is referencing this scene.
Maybe.
But like there is this where basically she steps out and says,
that's like in the first few chapters of that book too.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that, that's a scene where you have these villagers who are like, you're an evil magic user, bad, knowledgeable person. And it's like, yeah, and I'll use that knowledge to heal your ass.
Yeah.
When I read that scene in the Stormlight Archive, I immediately came back.
Yeah, and during this conversation, Moraine uses a bright blue light to sort of blind and dazzle them.
Totally.
Which is like kind of almost exactly what happens in that scene too. But right before that happens, we see some of the jerkier villagers yelling jerky stuff at Moraine and threatening to burn her out of the town.
The Congers, the Coplans, and Senbui.
And Bran Alvear walks up and confronts them, and he says, I like the way that this was phrased.
Did
someone suggest burning my inn? He asked softly. The 2 Coplans took a step back. So everybody knows, and he's holding a giant wooden hammer.
Yeah.
That helps.
In one hand, the mayor casually carried the big wooden maul he used to drive spigots into casks.
And then they all just sort of back away like they're boys in trouble.
Uh-huh. Because they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also like how Harold Luhan, the blacksmith, he's like, yeah, I'm just going to crack my knuckles right on your... Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Was that threatening?
Oh. I hope you can dismiss this investigation. So, they pretty quickly settle down. Like once Luhan shows up and the mayor's, is like, yeah, are you gonna burn my town down? Am I in down? They're like, no, we're not gonna burn your in down. But they do want her to leave.
Yeah.
And so she tells the story of Manetheren.
Right. She does the little blinding trick, and I think she uses the power to manipulate her voice too. Rand says it was like, what does he say? It carried over all the other sounds, but it wasn't loud at all. He says something like that. And
see, I think that's just Moiraine being commanding and awesome. And
oh, maybe. I always assume she's just using the power to manipulate people. It could be either.
She just has such a presence that she can talk quietly and her voice carries.
Yeah. And here's another thing we don't really ever see again, this staff thing. She sort of explains it later, and where she says, like...
It's a prop.
That's what she says.
Yeah. I assume she's just, like, tying flows of fire to it and using that to spin.
Yeah.
To create the sparks.
Or just light.
Yeah.
It's just a light show.
Right. The staff thing, I don't worry about the staff thing.
Yeah.
It was a prop. She used it. It's not an object of power. It's not a terra angreal. It's a piece of wood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very nicely carved piece of wood.
So, but she tells a story.
Yeah, she tells the story of King Aemon. Probably gonna read a lot. Okay, we just paused recording for a second so I could sum up this story that Moiraine is about to tell the villagers. This is going to take a second. So I hope you're in for listening to me talk for about 7 whole minutes. 10 minutes? Oh, we'll see. I cut up what's in the book to try to not literally just actually read you 5 pages, and she kind of says in an accusatory way, "Is this what Aemon's blood has come to?" The Aes Sedai voice was not loud, but it overwhelmed every other sound. Little people squabbling for the right to hide like rabbits. Bran said, "Forgotten who we were always who we have been. Honest farmers and shepherds and craftsmen. 2 rivers folk." To the south, Moiraine said, lies the river you call the White River, but far to the east of here men still call it by its rightful name, Manetheren Drell. 2,000 years ago, the Manetheren Drell flowed by the walls of a mountain city, so lovely to behold that Ogier stonemasons came to stare in wonder. Their king was Aemon Alcar Althorin. Aemon, son of Car, son of Thorin, and Eldrine Aiel Alcarlin was his queen. Aemon, a man so fearless that the greatest compliment for courage any could give, even among his enemies, was to say that a man had Aemon's heart. Eldrine, so beautiful that it was said the flowers bloomed to make her smile, bravery and beauty and wisdom and a love that death could not sunder. Weep, if you have a heart, for the loss of them, for the loss even of their memory. Weep for the loss of their blood, which I thought was an interesting point because she's literally talking about their blood right now, the blood of the people in front of her.
And every time you lose people, you lose 8 pints of blood.
Yeah. She fell silent then, but no one spoke. Rand was as bound as the others in the spell she had created. When she spoke again, he drank it in, and so did the rest. For nearly 2 centuries, the Trolloc Wars had ravaged the length and breadth of the world, and wherever battles raged, the Red Eagle banner of Manetheren was at the forefront. They were far away then, the men of Manetheren, on the field of Bakar, called the Field of Blood, when news came that a Trolloc army was moving against their home. Without hesitation, without thought for the distance they must travel, they marched from that very field of victory, still covered in dust and sweat and blood. Day and night they marched, for they had seen the horror a Trolloc army had left behind it, and no man of them could sleep at night when such a danger threatened Manetheren. When the Dark One's army swooped down upon the lands of Manetheren, the men of the mountain home stood before it, with their backs to the Terran Drell. The host that faced the men of Manetheren was enough to daunt the bravest heart. Yet they knew what they must do. Their homeland lay just across the river. They must keep that host, and the power with it, from the mountain home. Aemon crossed the Terran Drell, Moiraine told them, destroying the bridges behind him, and he said word throughout his land for the people to flee. But some did not flee. First in a trickle, then a river, then a flood, men went, not to safety, but to join the army fighting for their land, shepherds with bows and farmers with pitchforks. Women went too, shouldering what weapons they could find and marching side by side with their men. No one made the journey who did not know they would never return. But it was their land. It had been their fathers' and it would be their children's, and they went to pay the price of it. Not a step of ground was given up until it was soaked in blood. But at the last, the army of Manetheren was driven back to here, to this place you now call Emmonsfield, and here the Trolloc hordes surrounded them. Trolloc dead and corpses of human renegades piled up in mounds, but always more scrambled over those charnel heaps and waves of death that had no end. There could be but one finish. No man or woman had stood beneath the banner of the Red Eagle at that day's dawning that still lived when night fell. The sword that could not be broken was shattered. In the mountains of mist, alone in the emptied city of Manetheren, Eldrine felt Aemon die, and her heart died with him. And where her heart had been was left only a thirst for vengeance. Vengeance for her love. Vengeance for her people and her land. Driven by grief, she reached out to the true source and hurled the one power at the Trolloc army. And there the dreadlords died where they stood. Now they ran like beasts before a wildfire in the forest, with no thought for anything but escape. So weep for Manetheren. Weep for what is lost forever.
I'd love to hear what you think. We read those quotes and we listened to them, but what do you think about them?
Well, in the Wheel of Time world, there's many kinds of magic. One magic is a thing that I've never really said this out loud for it, but a thing that I kind of think of as blood magic, where basically the heroism and deeds of your ancestors can sort of carry down and give you literal strength and courage and luck.
They talk about the blood of Manetheren.
Right. And I'm saying that because the very first thing Moiraine says is, this what Aemon's blood has come to? And that's what she's talking about. She's expecting to see impressive people because of the impressive past of this land.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that if your ancestors were amazing people, then you have the potential to be amazing. You have their blood. You have their genes. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's so much a magic as it is. We do see like how Matt inherits some of the vocabulary.
Yeah.
So there is some magic involved there.
Yeah. It's not that clearly defined, but I think of it as like a type of magic. I mean, it's not like channeling. It's not like a real direct thing.
And we see in the Seanchan, they track how closely they are related to Arthur Pendragon.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a magic thing or if that's just...
It could be.
Going back to one of my theories is one of the things I've talked about in the past is the Seanchan Empress's throne.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a binding chair or at least a compulsion device. And I wonder if maybe it only works for descendants of Arthur Hawkwing, and that's why it's important that you are closely related to him, because for some reason it may be attuned to his descendants. And so you only have the power of the Crystal Throne if you're actually legitimately descended from Arthur Hawkwing.
Maybe.
Just a thought, since we're talking about blood magic.
The Seanchan have other blood magic too, but it's different.
Like what?
We see at the very end of the series the rings that you like feed some drops of your blood, and they make you superhuman for a time, and then they like draw on your life force and then eventually kill you. That's
right. I forgot about those rings that Gawain uses.
Yeah. He puts on like 3 of them or something.
Moron. Good discussion.
It's really just interesting because this is a story that happens, and the apex of it literally happens right where these people are standing. Like the land, the patch of earth that they're standing on right now was once soaked by the blood of their ancestors. Just covered in their bodies, heaps of bodies.
Yeah, my feeling is that they were about to get slaughtered. And then she was up in the city, and she drew way too much power, right? And do we think she had some Angriel, some Terangriel, some Saangriel, something that helped her?
I would assume so. And we also know that, Moiraine says, Eldrine felt Aemon die, and her heart died with him. And where her heart was left only a thirst for vengeance.
I assume that's just the Warder bond.
Yeah, that's what I'd think.
Yeah, that they have a Warder Aes Sedai bond, an early one.
Aemon dies, and Eldrine goes full Lose Their Telamon.
Right. Yeah, she pulls everything she has to do the devastation that she does.
It's not exactly the same.
Yeah.
She gives a pretty good description of what happens here. Driven by grief, she reached out to the true source and hurled the one power at the Trolloc army. So it's not the same. That's what Luther and Telamon did.
Right. He sort of hurls the power at himself.
Yeah. And there the Dreadlords died wherever they stood, whether in their secret councils or exhorting their soldiers. In the passing of a breath, the Dreadlords and generals of the Dark One's host burst into flame. Fire consumed their bodies, and terror consumed their just victorious army. Now they ran like beasts.
That kind of reminds me of the way Rand in the Stone kills all the Trollocs when they invade.
I'm visualizing it the same way.
He brings up that like swirling storm of lightning that targets Trollocs and Myrddraal.
This is like a living fire, but same idea.
Yeah.
That hunts them.
Yeah. So the people are in Aemon's field, cornered, about to be slaughtered. Aemon has fallen. And then she casts this crazy magic that slaughters the Trollocs and the Fades and basically saves the people. And they end up settling down right then and there in the spot where they survive. Because everything else has been destroyed.
And Eldrine does die from wielding too much of the one power.
Think about a resistor with too much current going through it. It burns right out.
Nothing was left of their farms, their villages, or their great city. Some would say that nothing was left for them. Nothing but to flee to other lands where they could begin anew. They did not think so. They had paid such a price in blood and hope for their land as had never been paid before, and now they were bound to the soil by ties stronger than steel. Never again did a Manetheren rise. But she says basically those people never left.
The Two Rivers folk do have an incredible tie to their land.
And a tie to what Moraine refers to as the Old Blood.
Right.
We get to see later that a lot of talented folks come out of the Two Rivers, who are people with Two Rivers blood, before the big population influx.
Right.
They send some scouts from the White Tower and end up pulling like way more women than they've ever found in any region before, who are fairly talented channelers.
A lot of power and influence is inherited.
Yeah.
A lot of your potential is based on who you're related to or descended from.
Sure.
Seems a little unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, Rand's the descendant of a queen and a clan chief.
It's pretty much how our world works.
Well,
you're unlikely to rise well above wherever your parents were.
So, I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say, that we're coming to the end of the chapter. Do you have anything else about the story that Moraine tells?
No, except that it has a desired effect on the people who, most of them, seem to kind of apologize and, like, you're right, we acted like idiots. Also a great story.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is kind of a crazy chapter. We get both a dream and a dream shard and a historical story. So I almost feel like this is two separate chapters. You have the dream to start with and then the story. But they're very different.
Yeah, I was almost surprised when I realized it was going to be the same chapter.
Rand is trying to convince himself he's starting out on a grand adventure. He's starting out on a grand adventure. I just don't think it's going to be as much fun as he was hoping.
Yeah.
That's the thing about adventures. It's not always fun.
So as they turn to go, I really liked that one of the last lines in this chapter is, "What are you waiting for?" Lan asked from the door that led back to the common room. With a start, Mat hurried to him. And that's how the chapter ends.
Good chapter.
Yeah.
There's a lot in that chapter. I gotta say.
We always get together right before and we kind of stand around and talk a little bit and like eat something, drink a little, and then start doing this. And like for the last like 3 or 4 weeks that we got together, we're always like, I don't know, there wasn't that much in that one. Like we might have to push 2 chapters together, and every time we end up with like an hour and 15 minutes of recorded stuff.
The one with the Westwood and
yeah,
we managed to push that together, but the rest of it's just been, we just have so much to talk about.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I'm saying like we usually record for like between an hour and an hour and a half, and you see between a 30-minute and 1 hour episode, because at least a quarter of what we say is complete crap. The rest is like acceptable, or just like long silences where we're flipping through our notes or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, or like I get up to pee and I have to cut out the sound of me pissing into the toilet,
or yeah.
Or a dog barking.
The
or
dog
something.
barks at someone being loud outside of the house, and we just pause for a while.
I think I cut out 5 minutes of ums, uhs, and you knows.
Yeah. And us talking about totally unrelated stuff.
Yeah, and then of course there's inappropriate subjects that.
Yeah, I think we cut like 20 minutes of me talking about my love life once. I don't remember how we broke into that, but just complaining.
Good stuff. All right, I'm cutting that off.
Okay.
Yeah, we're done.
We're at a really cool point now where, what are the numbers? So if we increased our downloads per episode by somewhere around like 8 times or something,
Yeah, 8 to 10.
we could actually talk to advertisers, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, good for us. Maybe at some point we'll talk about Patreon too. I don't,
Yeah, we should put something up just in case people want to throw money at us. We should let them, make it possible.
I don't think we are doing this for the money, but
No.
like anyone who does a podcast to tell you, it costs money to host the podcast, and the microphones we're talking on cost a little bit of money, and
just the time put into it.
yeah, I didn't realize how much editing can be a time suck.
And yeah, now that we're getting more into it, not just the research, but every week we get together and talk about spending more and more time on social media, and I'm making really slow steps in that direction. But if it keeps going, I'm going to be working on the podcast every day soon.
Yeah, so we really enjoy bringing this to you, and if you have a little extra money to toss our way, we should probably create a conduit for that.
Yeah, we should.
We're not expecting anything at this point, and a great way to help us out would be just throw us a rating, throw us a quick review.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or your favorite podcast client.